Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 5. And what I want to accomplish in this video be a little bit different than the ones we've done in the past. I'm going to focus on just one chapter in this one, then we'll come back and get the other two. Excuse me. But I want to talk about chapter 10 because chapter 10 really is about forecasting, and it is an introductory. What you're going to see is the introductory material on this particular chapter, as well as this chapter is using qualitative time series and a casual forecasting methods as a basis for its chapter organization. And in some cases, we'll be using quantitative data. And for this week's team assignment, you're going to be actually working on a case study, which we're going to include here at the end of this chapter as well. So what this chapter is really trying to do is to illustrate the different uses of forecasting and operations and the different methods that are available. Also, it's going to try to link the uses between and the methods of how to go about presenting some of this data. Exponential smoothing is often the most commonly one used because it uses regression, and regression is one of those techniques that you learned in your statistical courses, and it really adds robustness and really smooths out the data, which gives you a much more accurate forecasting model. And I'll show you an example in this case of what I mean by that. But using exponential with regression or smoothing or the decomposition method is really going to add, again, robustness, more accuracy to your forecasting system. And certainly, why do we forecast? Simply for the reason that if we're trying to project how much goods we're going to have to manufacture based on our sales, we don't want to underpredict the amount we need to manufacture, but neither do we want to overpredict as well, because each one is bad. If we underpredict and we cannot meet the customer's demands, then they may choose to go to our competitors. On the other hand, if we overpredict and overmanufacture and cannot sell it, then that's inventory that we have in our warehouses, tied up capital, tied up resources that we had to manufacture that we could have used that for something else. And we certainly could have used that capital for something else as well. So with that being said, let's look at the discussion questions. And again, we'll come back and end up this particular video with the case that you have to do as a team this week. And the first question number 1, what is the difference between the forecasting demand and forecasting sales? Well, as you know, demand is a measure of the amount of goods or services that is desired by the customer, whereas sales measures the amount of actually purchased by the customers. So sales will probably an accurate reflection of the demand, especially if we have no stockouts. Again, the importance of forecasting, whereas no customers are turned away and they go somewhere else to get their goods. Also, demand can also be accurately forecasted from the historical sales data if they have no stockouts. And typically that's what a lot of people will do, will just look at the historical data, which is a good place to look. But that historical data, you got to think about, depending on the type of business you are. You may have seasonality, season trends. You may have a peak season, like in retail, Christmas. So as you know, after Thanksgiving, the big sale on Friday for retail goods. So you have that in November and December, getting ready for the Christmas holiday, whereas January, February, March may not be as robust. So you have to think about seasonality in some of this as well. Then question number 4 asks us to describe the uses of qualitative time series and casual. Well, qualitative forecasts are useful for long-range time horizons and the purposes such as process design, capacity planning, and facilities location. And they're most useful when there's no historical data that exist, because again, it's qualitative in nature. It's my best guess, my best judgment. It's pulling in, looking at the people that surround me and in that organization, or equally important in the industry, trying to make some long-range plans. Time series forecast is very good in the short term for purposes such as materials management, purchasing, and scheduling. And casual models are useful in the medium term or for aggregate planning and budgeting. And they certainly can be useful in long term if applicable historical data exists, and in the short term if the cost of the method is low relative to its benefits, or risk versus consequences, or risk versus reward. Question number 5 deals with qualitative forecasting and casual forecasting. Is a useful input to inventory and scheduling decision. Why is this statement true? For inventory and scheduling, there are usually a large number of products that one has to consider, and decisions tend to be repetitive and somewhat frequently. And generally, the cost required to make such a qualitative or casual forecast is relatively large for possible improvements in accuracy, as well as the time requirements that may make it difficult to produce forecasts as frequently as required for inventory and scheduling decisions, especially if those decisions are rapidly changing or the customer's demands are rapidly changing. And finally, for this chapter, question number 12, under what circumstances might CPFR be useful and when it's not useful? It's usually useful when there's a relatively small number of suppliers that can provide most of the products. You know, the 80-20% rule, that still applies. And even if there's too many suppliers, if it would be expensive for the customer to collaborate with each one of those suppliers. Yet, on the other hand, a supplier may not be able to use CPFR if there's too many customers, and that certainly is true in retail situations such as grocery stores and box stores where they have multiple customers, somebody like Walmart, say for instance. And this collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment, CPFR, is also useful when most retailers have a handful of significant suppliers, and therefore that they can collaborate with them. Okay, that kind of deals with what I'm going to talk about with reference to the chapter questions for chapter 10. Let's talk about your project for this week. Your project for this week really is going to go into, as a team environment, looking at doing a forecast. And we've got everything loaded up in Moodle, where you should have the access to the team writing assignment template, and this template embeds the instructions, and also in this template I have a link to the actual case study itself. And as everything loads up, and in that case study, I think there's 4 questions at the end of the case study that you will need to address as a team. Just like you do in all team projects, I only need 1 team paper submitted into turning in. So here is the case. It's the Merriwell Bag Company that manufacture bags, and they're trying to predict sales or forecast sales for 2012. Here is the actual case study link here. This is the actual, what the actual case study actually looks like whenever you click into it and load it into Moodle. Excuse me, it's loaded into Moodle. But as you read the case, it's asking us to do create, in essence, a highly accurate demand forecast that's going to allow Merriwell to make a very good informed decision. But as you will learn in this chapter, it's not only about the quantitative data, but you cannot negate his research that he's done. He knows his customers, he knows his market, so he knows his competitors. So using that qualitative aspect along with the quantitative aspect is how we can come up, hopefully, with a much clearer predictive model to help Merriweather in his decision-making process. Here is the monthly sales data, and we have this embedded into a Moodle as well in an Excel spreadsheet that you'll have access to, and we'll get to that momentarily. And this is the discussion questions that you will have to address as a team. So being able to, and what we'll talk about today specifically will be how do I go about creating a forecast so it helps me in addressing question number 2. So let's look at that a little bit closer. And by the way, what we're going to be talking about today is the decomposition method. And that decomposition method is also in our textbook as a great example, very similar to this case on pages, let me get to that, on the supplement to chapter 10, page 211 through 214. 211 through 214 talks about this advanced method in forecasting. So that's some additional reading for you. And I believe there's a case in the back of the book that also is not the case we're going to be talking about, but it has very similar attributes to it. And I believe that case is, and I'm looking for it, I should have already had it pulled up. Please bear with me just for a moment. Let me find that case so that, not that you have to read it, but if you refer to it, you may see some tenets that's, again, related to that one as well. But that's not the case that we're going to be using for what we're trying to do here. And that's Best Homes Incorporated Forecasting, page 447. So with that being said, let's take a look at this case. This is the template that you're going to be using. You're going to have 5 paragraphs in this, and each one of these you're going to be, paragraph 1, part of this is to get you to being used to developing an executive summary based on the case. That's what paragraph 1 is all about. You're doing an executive summary, and you're telling the reader what they can expect in the subsequent paragraph. Paragraph 2, you're going to address the case question 1 and 2. And in paragraph 3, you're going to respond to question number 3. Paragraph 4, you're going to respond to question number 4. Those questions are in the case. And in paragraph 5, you're just going to put an overall summary of what you have generated. And this is just some additional links that you may have the opportunity to review to help you as you develop your skills in writing executive summaries. No page limit per se. Ever how many pages you need. It's really about the content and the robustness of the content, as well as APA style of writing. So, the Tillman School of Business, you cannot get away from APA style of writing. So that's what the template is. Here, the company that we just went through, Merriwell Bag Company, here's the case again. So you have that available to you for your reading and understanding as you move forward. Your team evaluation form, you want to use that as well. And I apologize, I thought I had the Excel spreadsheet model in here, but it is linked into the template. It is linked there, but also we have it linked back up in the course materials for our course as it loads up. So we can get to it here as well. Here it is, under week 5. I'm sorry, it's under week 5, not on the course material. Here's the Excel spreadsheet that you're going to actually use as you get ready to help you address question number 2. So here's what it looks like. And as you can see, page 505 is the page of that case that is loaded up in the Moodle. This is the actual data. And what I'm going to show you very briefly, again, there's multiple ways in which you can do a forecast. This number here is nothing more than just the average of the 5 years worth of data. So that's one way. Another way is the moving average, where I look at the last 3 years of data. So you can see the significant difference. Now you say, well, it's only 600 bags. Yeah, 600 bags, but if it's our money that's being tied up in inventory, 600 bags could be that margin of failure or success. So whenever I took this data here, one of the first things that I did was to go ahead and convert it and put it into a column, and we're going to go into this detail. We're going to put it in a column so I can help resort it in a way where it makes clear sense to me, and it helps me in my analysis. So let me come back here just for a moment, if we may. So you have a lot of videos down in here with reference to time series, decomposition, very good series of videos, probably take you about an hour to go over all three. Their example that they're using is quarterly data, but the concepts are very, very similar to what I'm going to show you here. But because we're using monthly data and some of the terminology is a little bit different, I felt like it was imperative to go ahead and give you a video here specifically to what we're working on, in lieu of trying to do something that's a little bit different. Again, the terminology is very similar, but they're using quarterly data. We're using monthly data. But these videos certainly are well worth your time to review. Here is some more videos, very short videos as well, that goes into some of these other different methods. And as you review these videos and as you think about doing this case, think about it from the standpoint that each one of these, they're from the simple average all the way to the exponential smoothing, the accuracy that you'll see that becomes more and more robust when you go from a very simple averaging to a more complex exponential smoothing, as an example. Okay, so with that being said, let's come back here. So what I did is I created, took the raw data that was in multiple columns or in rows, and put all the sales data separated out by period, starting with January of 07 being the first period, all the way through January of 2012 being the last year of data. What I have highlighted in yellow is this is what I'm trying to find, and this is the actual forecast, and we'll get into that here momentarily. So what do we have here? So we have periods, the number of months. There's, again, periods is the time frames. Year T, years of subscript T is the sales. This is the actual data that came from page 505, this data here. This is the 12-month moving average, and there's no rhyme or reason as to why I started here in D10. I don't correlate this data here directly to this first 6 months of data. It was just my starting point. The real key here is that, as you can see, what I'm averaging here on a 12-month moving average, I'm actually looking at 12 months worth of data from January through December, and that's the 12-month average. This is my next 12 months average. This is my next 12 months average, and you can kind of see how this is being built from every 12 months. It's creating a new 12 months, a new 12 months. So I get down to a point where I stopped here because that's 12 months of data that I don't have. Well, as you can see, I don't have anything out here. I actually went one too far. I actually stopped here as far as my data calculations go. That's the actual 12 months worth of data. This value of 9818.2 is only 11 months worth of data. So I actually stopped once I got out of 12 months worth of data. So that's what that column there is reflecting. And what I did here is wherever I put my cursor at, if I want to see how it's being calculated, if I trace precedence, it shows you exactly where that data range is coming from. And I can do dependence that tells me what is dependent upon that calculation and remove errors. So it's just a quick snapshot way of me showing you where it's at. Then I did a 2-month centering moving average. And that 2-month centering moving average is this average of these two pieces of data is here. So that becomes the 2-month data. That's the center point between 6,500 and 5583.3. My next point, 6625, is the center between 6583.3 and 666.7. That's the center point. So I have a 12-month moving average and a 2-month center moving average. And that moving average goes all the way down to a point where I don't have the second. This is blank because I don't have any data here for the month of August. So that's the reason why I stopped at the month of June. So you see that's 2-month centering actually centers the two values preceding it. That's the center value. Then we did these seasonal ratios here in column F. And in column F, really, when we say deseasonal, it's just looking at a strict month-to-month calculation. There's no seasonality to it. As you know, as you read the case, you'll see that Merriwell, he has peak times during the year. And we can kind of see this data here, that in January through March through April, his sales kind of levelized. Then it starts picking back up in May and June, July, kind of falls off in August. Then it looks like we're going into the Christmas season. He peaks back up. The same thing is true for the next year, all the way through. So you can see that it looks like his peak is in the fall, and he kind of levels out in the winter, January through March, April timeframe. So what this deseasonality factor is, it has no consideration whatsoever to those peak seasons. As we can see here, it is just a straight calculation. I'm taking the column, I'm taking my sales forecast that's in C11, and I'm dividing it by my 2-month moving average. And my 2-month moving average, again, is that center line between 2 months. So that's where I'm getting the seasonal factor too. And that's true all the way through the data set here to the very end, where we're looking at the deseasonal data between my sales and my 2-month moving average. So that's how that is being calculated. So as we can see, that it's non-seasonal, the 12-month, the 2-month, and the deseasonal ratios. It's not seasonal information. It's just month by month or 12-month and a 2-month moving average. So now I want to look at the average seasonal data. This is going to, now I'm starting to get into that point where it's getting a little bit more fine-tuned so I can help make my predictions. So as we look at the average seasonal ratio, what that really means is that I'm looking at the average for the month that I'm interested in. In this particular, here in G7, what we're looking at is we want to calculate the average seasonal ratios. And these are the ratios that is attained by averaging the seasons from each month, from the same month in each consecutive years. So for example, we're starting off with July seasonal ratio, and that's obtained by taking the July month of 2007, July 28, July 29, July 2010, and adding those, averaging those values together. And I'm doing that for July, August, September, all the way through till I get back to June, which gives me 12 months of data. So let me show you the trace precedent so you see exactly where it's coming from. And this would be true again for every month. So for the month of July 2007, for the month of July 2008, for the month of July 2009, for the month of July 2010. And as you can see, I don't have any data for July 2011 because of the seasonal average, excuse me, the 12-month average and the 2-month rolling average. So we stop. That's the reason why there's nothing here for July, reason why it's not being calculated here. Then we do the very same thing here for August, very same thing. And as you can kind of see what we're doing here, it goes from July all the way through June. And what does this sum right here mean? Well, this seasonal average seasonal average is just that. It's showing the resulting 12 seasonal ratios that's added together. And that ratio, or that particular addition, is 11.8977. The sums of this really is about, okay, did it really equate to a 12-month period? So in essence, so it's 11.897 months. So we have 12 months worth of data. So what I want to do next is to ensure that I have a very good accurate sum of 12. And this is where I'm going to normalize my seasonal ratios. And what I'm trying to get to is to have a 12 months full of ratios, in essence, what I'm trying to get to. That's the reason why these are highlighted in red, just to help explain this concept. And as you look at the average seasonal ratios compared to the normalized seasonal ratios, they're not that much difference over a 12-month period. But again, as I'm trying to create decomposition ratios that's going to give me a robustness into the calculations, is the reason why we're using a normalized seasonal ratio. And we'll use that normalized seasonal ratio here to help us make our predictions. And again, it's trying to be as accurate as we possibly can using the decomposition method, simply for the reason that, again, if I am going to invest time, resources, and dollars into having capital and having inventory, I want to make sure that inventory is going to be inventory that I can move, and not inventory that I'm going to have to sit on and not be able to sell it and tie up my capital. But equally important, that if I had to scramble and do additional manufacturing, I have a more accurate of what my needs may be. So I think you can understand why it's important to try to get your forecasting, for a whole host of reasons, as accurate as you possibly can. So how do we calculate the normalized seasonal ratios? So I'm taking the value of my average seasonal ratio, and I am dividing that by the sum here in G23, which is 11.8977. So I'm using that to normalize all my other months. And as you can see, if you're familiar with Excel, this first value of G11 is called a relative reference. So no matter where I move my cursor, it's going to go to the next cell address. Next cell address. So it's relative to that cell address. This $G$23 is the absolute reference, which means no matter where I move my cursor, that $G$23 stays the same. It's absolute, and I'm using that absolute reference in my calculations, and this is where that data is coming from, 11.8977 in G23. So that's the difference between an absolute and a relative reference when it comes to Excel. So when you see that $ in a formula in Excel, that's an absolute reference. So now with the relative of 11.8977 of my seasonal, now I normalize that, and you can see once I normalize that, and I just did a sum just so I could see, make sure that it calculated out of 12 months. You can see now it did equal 12 months. And again, look back over to compare the two columns, and they're not that much difference because of 11.8977, 12. We could have stopped right here and got a pretty close forecast, but if we can normalize it and get as accurate as we possibly can, that's what we want to do. Now, your textbook also tells you in this particular chapter to use regression analysis, and if you recall regression analysis from your statistical days, y prime equals a plus bx, or for what we're calculating, our y prime is going to be 5997.3 plus 70.2x, and we're going to show you how we did this calculation here. But if you don't want to use Excel, if you recall from your statistical days, here's the formula for those of you who just absolutely love math and want to sit down and do it the math way. This is another way in which you can do the X and Y variables to come up with and do this calculation that hopefully if you do it correctly with all the data, you'll come up with y prime equals 5997.3 plus 70.2x. But here's how you would calculate that from regression analysis using a calculator. We chose to do this a little bit different. What we wanted to do was use regression analysis, Excel function that's available to us in lieu of doing a manual calculation. So how do we do this? Well, we go to data, analysis, and if you have Excel, and I'm going to assume that you have the data analysis pack already loaded on your machine, but if not, you can Google that, and if you're still unsure, let me know and we can walk you through that. But I'm going to assume that you have that already loaded on your machine. And it's free. It comes with Excel. It's just an add-in, just a matter of making sure you add it into it. So we select Data tab, Data Analysis. Then we're going to scroll down till we get to this word regression. We're going to hit OK. And in this regression, in the input Y variables is where we want to go get our column E information, or our 2-month moving data. So we're going to highlight E11 through E58, if I remember correctly. Yeah, E58, excuse me, E11 through E58. Our input X range is going to be based on our time periods of T. So we're going to select the same data range. We're starting in July of 2007 based on where our data is at. And we're going all the way down to June of 2011, which gives us our entire data set. Now, I'm going to put this on the same work page so you can see what I did. I've already done it here. And this, the only two variables that I'm interested in is this intercept and variable, or A intercept, B variable, the A variable and the B variable, alpha and bravo, to use in order to do my regression analysis. And as you can see, the 5997.3, 70.2 is the very same values that we had here. So I've already done it, but let me put it here again. That's what I did. I'm putting it on the same worksheet. I can apply it to a new worksheet if I wanted to, or even to a new workbook. So it's wherever you want to put it. I like to keep all mine on the same page so that I can keep everything together. So after I do that, I'm going to hit the word OK. And as you can see, the same values come back up, which is what we would anticipate. So now I have the regression analysis. And how do we use regression? Well, we use regression analysis if we were to plot out an XY plot, scatter plot, then we can use regression analysis to tell us what the trend data is doing or make predictions for the future. That's the value of doing a regression analysis. So now that we have done the regression analysis, we have our two variables. Now we can get into and we can actually do our forecast for our 2012 data for time periods of 61 through 72. And this was just nothing more than the number of months in the entire data set. That's all that represent. I call them time periods. And the time periods of January 12th through December 2012 is time period 61 through 72. Now we can forecast this value. So I kind of created this 3 columns over here to help me do that. And the first thing that I wanted to do was to look at, bring down my normalized seasonal ratio values from January through December again. And if you recall, we started here in January through June, then I came back up and got July through December. So if we look at this data by month, it should be the very same data that's reflected here. So, and I'm going to use that here momentarily. And all I did was just copy it and tell it go look in that cell address and put it here. So here's where the regression analysis comes in. Here again is where I'm using an absolute reference. I'm saying y equals a plus bx, where a is my value here. My a-intercept is my value here, 599.7, and my b variable or Bravo variable here is in cell address L30. So I've got, again, the absolute reference of L29 and L30, which means it's not going to change. It anchors those two variables for me here and here. So this is, in essence, y prime equals a plus b times x. And x, in this case, is in the A65, which is a period number 61, 62, 63, all the way down to 72. And each one of these periods correlates to a month. So that's how that calculation, this is where this calculation is coming from. So that's the regression average of y prime based on y prime equals a plus bx. That's the reason why we calculated the regression analysis and got these two variables here that we were interested in getting to help us in this regression analysis. So now that we have that, now we want to calculate the actual forecast for 2012 data, and that's what I have highlighted in yellow in column J. So here I'm taking my regression analysis of y value times my normalized seasonal ratios, and I'm doing a multiplication. And this is what I'm doing all the way down throughout my data set here. And that's all we're doing. So as you can see, what we just accomplished now was that we set up our data. We went in and we looked at a 12-month moving average because that was our data set. And I think that one video told you that if you go highlight all your data, and then if you were to insert a line graph, and look at cycles, what we see is there's a cycle every 12 months. Every 12 months there's a cycle. So that's the reason why we chose the 12-month moving average, where the other video is showing you on a quarterly basis. We did ours on a 12-month basis. So that's the reason why we did a 12-month average. That's the reason why we did a 2-month moving center average, to get the average between every 2 months worth of data. Then we did the deseasonal ratios, because we were looking at the average 2-month average across that month. Then we did the average seasonal ratios based on the average of the months of each year for that month, like July, all 4 data sets, August, all 4 data sets, etc. Then we normalized our seasonal ratios to give us a little bit more accuracy per month by taking the average and dividing it by the normalized value, excuse me, non-normalized value of 11.8977, which gives us, when we total back up, 12 months. And I use this normalized seasonal data to calculate, along with my regression analysis, to calculate my actual forecast. So as we can see, as an example, look at the difference in the robustness and the accuracy for January of 2012 at 4753 bales. Where here we did just a straight up average, and it was 3,400 bales. We did the last 3 periods of data at 4,000 bales. So you can see how far off just using the average and the simple averaging as compared to the decomposition values, how much more accurate that decomposition value really is. And ladies and gentlemen, that's really the reasons why we use decomposition as a way to help us in our forecasting technique. And one last thing, here I just added up the sum of the sales demand forecast just as a comparison. Again, part of this overall analysis. Getting the quantitative data is one thing. Then the next thing is, what does it really tell us? So as we start analyzing this information, and if we look at all the ratios, the normalized seasonal ratios, we can certainly see a trend that's going on. There's going to be some monthly variation as you would expect, but it looks like January through April, it kind of levelizes, not a lot of demand. May, June kind of goes up. July continually goes up. Then when we get into the Christmas season, it really peaks up. So you have that piece of it as well. So Ed Merriweather can certainly use this forecasting technique. It could be useful for him, but he cannot negate the fact his feel for the market. In any analytical information that's being utilized has got to be balanced with the qualitative side of what that gentleman knows about his market. I mean, he has judgment, he has history, he knows his customers, he knows his market, he knows his suppliers. So that's got to be factored into it as well. And also, sometimes you got to take a step back and look at the overall bigger picture. What's the state of the economy? What's the consumer's attitudes? What's the activity of your competitors? In essence, I'm using this as one tool in my management toolbox to be able to draw a conclusion on forecasting in order to make managerial decisions. And by using this particular method with seasonality and normalized seasonality and making those adjustments, we can get a much more accurate forecast of exactly what Mr. Merriwell needs to do and what we need to do to make a recommendation. So as you review the case and as you provide and as you address those 4 questions, use this method. Certainly not the only method, but if you use the other methods, I'll be looking for you to provide a great rationale as to why those methods are much better than this decomposition. So you can review the other videos if you like. You can do the very same thing, come to the same conclusion. But if you have a question moving forward, please let me know. and I look forward to reading your submittals. Thank you so much.